Hello and welcome to today's IALD webinar, Light, the Well Building Standard. My name is Joe de Guzman, now from the IALD, and I'll be your host for today's session. Started in 1969, the International Association of Lighting Designers, or IALD, is the authority on lighting design for the global community. We advance the global profession of lighting design through leadership and advocacy. We offer our 1,500 members over 60 countries education, community, and engagement. We want to thank our sponsor, Coolidge Lighting, for supporting this webinar. Coolidge's luminous ceiling products are focused on creating spaces that enhance wellness by combining significant noise reduction with flicker-free, low-glare illumination in large formats that bring the feeling of the outdoors to interior spaces. This live webinar qualifies for continuing education credit. The AIA will award one HSW learning unit for attending the live presentation. Contact Teresa at IALD.org to request the credit. This webinar may also qualify for continuing education credit for the CLD, LC, and WELL AP, all of which are self-evaluated and self-reported. You must attend the entire webinar in order to qualify. With that, let me introduce you to our moderator, Ken Douglas, IALD Fellow from HLB Lighting Design. Ken?
Hello and welcome to the IALD International Well Building Institute review of the new version 2 lighting concepts. As you said, I'm Ken Douglas. I'm a principal with HLB Lighting Design in New York, and I serve as the IALD liaison to the Well Building Council, and I'll be acting as your host today. With us this morning are thought leaders and well advisors, Gayatri Unikrishna, who's the Vice President of Standard Development and the Concept Lead for Light at the International Well Building Institute, Gren Heimiller, Principal at Lamb Partners Lighting in Boston, Robert Soler, VP of Research and Technology at BIOS Lighting, where he researches light and health. First off, thank you for taking the time to join us. Gayatri, would you like to get us started with an overview of the Well V2, please?
Of course, thanks, Ken. Hi, everyone. Hope you're all having a good day and week wherever you are. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Gayatri Unikrishnan, and we are excited to talk to you about the Well Building Standard. Last week, we released Well V2. Well V2 is the most recent version of the Well Building Standard. Now, you may ask, what is Well? Well, very simply put, is a rating system. It's a tool for buildings to use to enhance the health and well-being of people inside. The tool is based on evidence-based research and industry best practices. It's a set of strategies that buildings and organizations can use to make people healthier, more productive, and happier. Well is currently found in in over 60 countries. We have about 4,500 plus projects that are registered, spanning over 600 million square feet. Our community is really large. We have about 13,000 and more Well APs. Some of you are Well APs, so welcome. And they reside in over 90 countries. So our work spans the breadth of the globe, and we truly consider ourselves a global standard. We have learned a lot, and we are still learning about how different strategies work in different cultures and different locations. Well began about 6 years ago to the date. In October 2014, Well V1 was released. We've learned a lot since the launch of Well V1. Well V1 had a slightly different structure from Well V2, and we used all that learning and we drove it into the Well V2 pilot. Now, you may ask, what is the difference between Well V2 pilot and Well V2? When we launched Well V2, we launched it in a beta version. So it was, we changed a lot of the structure of the rating system. We included certain sections that were not there before, and we ran it, we tested it for market feedback. We ran it through several review rounds before we said that we were ready to graduate the product, that we were ready to graduate the rating system. The review process took about 2 years. We had thousands of projects submit, thousands of projects register, thousands of people participated in review rounds. We had projects register in over 60 countries, and we finally went through a vote with our esteemed governance council, which included an ex-Surgeon General of the United States, Richard Carmona, ex-CEO of Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and a whole set of amazing, powerful people who all unanimously agreed that we met the very stringent standards that we had set for what a rating system must be. WellV2 Pilot is by far the most tested rating system that we know of. It's been tested in over 3,300 projects. It's in about 54 countries, counting every day. It's been used in industrial locations, in warehouses, in airports. We recently had a preschool certify, a hotel, hospitals, supermarkets, offices, homes. So we have really tested through the gamut of spaces of different people across the world, different occupant types, and we learned a lot, and we've been able to use that learning to simplify and in the final WellV2 product. So the pilot stage really helped us hone in on how to simplify the rating system and what is needed to meet the requirements for health and well-being in different kinds of spaces across the world. And along our journey, we had a lot of help. We had our well concept advisors who are thought leaders and experts in their own right, in their own fields, shepherding us, guiding us, and reviewing all of our features. Our well concept advisors span 9 concept advisories across our concept, and we have one especially for light. 3 of whom are on the line today, Robert, Ken, and Glenn. We also have a whole set of other thought leaders that you may be familiar with or you may have met. They have really been instrumental in the changes that have been made to well and continue to help us evolve the light concept. If you are interested in joining the light concept advisory, let me know. We are currently recruiting for the 2021 advisors. Now let's talk about WellV2. What is WellV2? So let me just take you down a journey and give you a quick overview of the rating system. Well, as I mentioned, is a rating system. It consists of 10 concepts. The concepts range from very technical, such as air, water, light, to more public health, more behavior oriented, such as mind and community. Each concept has a particular goal. That is based in research, and that includes a set of strategies that projects can pick and choose based on their priorities. For example, nourishment covers different things such as the availability of fruits and vegetables, portion sizes, and transparency around what is being served in a particular place. Light, for example, covers different requirements that we'll get into, but each of them contributes to a holistic system that covers the main requirements that we have deemed necessary for a place to be, for a building or organization to be deemed healthy. Each concept consists of a set of features. The features are categorized as preconditions or optimizations. Preconditions are mandatory. They answer the question what a well building must be. Each concept has a certain number of preconditions, and all buildings, all well-certified buildings across the world, no matter what the space type is required to meet the preconditions. There are about 24 well preconditions, and light has 2. Optimizations are options. They allow projects to choose based on their priorities, based on what they want to solve, based on what they already have access to, and they really allow projects to craft what their well certification should look like. There are 84 options, 84 optimizations, each of which have parts, and light has 7. Each of these features are verified in different ways. Documentation, either through documentation or on-site verification. The verification is conducted by GBCI, the same organization that conducts verification for LEED. And it's pretty rigorous and stringent. So every single feature has a verification type that is associated with it. And sometimes it involves performance testing agents coming to site, taking measurements, taking photographs to verify that the requirements have been met. Now, along with this, to allow projects to really navigate their way through the rating system, we have almost a project management tool available. This allows projects to go in, pick the features that are important to them, some of which are recommended based on a questionnaire they need to fill out, and really assign features to people who might be working on particular features. So for example, as lighting designers or a lighting professional, you may have the lighting features assigned to you. And it's really a way to allow projects to complete their well journey in a streamlined fashion. It gives all the information needed. So how it works is based on the amount of points received, based on the features that have been met, the projects achieve a certification. The certification can range from bronze to silver to gold to platinum, depending on the number of points met. Bronze is new to Well V2. We piloted it for Well Core, which is just a core and shell building. In Well V2 pilot, we heard immense positive feedback, and we decided to extend it to Well V2. It allows for different access points. It allows for projects to access well and to use well, allowing more people to have access to healthy spaces. Now let's focus on the light concept. The light concept has two main goals. The first is to provide brighter days and darker nights for circadian entrainment. And the second is to provide enough light to see in a visually comfortable environment. And that's done through a set of features. There are 9 features in the light concept, 2 preconditions, 7 optimizations. The optimizations vary from 1 point to 4 points, depending on what's being pursued. You can achieve up to 12 points in any concept. So we max out at 12, but it really covers the gamut of strategies that are necessary for a healthy lighting environment. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Ken, who will take us through the panel discussion.
Gayatri, thank you so much. It's so exciting to see that we're already at V2. You've incorporated a lot of the feedback that the lighting community has given you over the last year or so, and I think it's great that we're going to get into this today. So why don't we get started? And I want to let everyone know we're going to approach this from a slightly different direction. We're actually not going to go through the features one by one in order. Rather, we're going to separate the features out into topic groups. So our topic groups today are going to be daylight exposure, circadian lighting, electric lighting, and lighting strategies. So we're going to ask you to hold your questions till the end. We're going to do a question and answer session at the very end, make sure everybody gets their questions answered. And we're going to start with daylight exposure. So I'm going to turn to Glenn and Gayatri. I'm going to ask you both to walk us through these 3 features and how they relate to each other.
Glenn,
Greg, you're muted.
You're on mute.
Glenn, you're muted. Yep.
Classic problem, muted. Well, good morning and good afternoon to everyone, wherever you may be in the world. We're going to talk about L01 first, light exposure, and that is basically a new feature with Well V2. It really didn't exist in Well V1, and for me, it's the most important change, the most important difference between V1 and V2. And the reason for that is because it sets a basic requirement for light exposure for circadian entrainment, but it tells you to start with daylight. And if you can't achieve it with daylight, that minimum requirement, then you go to electric light with what is the circadian lighting design feature, which used to be a precondition in Well V1. So what is that minimum requirement? There are 3 options that you can use to meet it with daylight. One is to do a simulation with calculating your spatial daylight autonomy, just like we do with LEED. That's relatively complicated, and you probably don't want to do that unless you're already doing that for LEED or some other reason. The other two are relatively simple. One is basically based on proximity of people to windows, and the third option is a window area to floor area ratio. If you can meet the requirement of any one of those options, then you're done, and you've met this precondition. As Gayatri mentioned, this is a precondition. So if you do not meet this, your project cannot be well certified. So I would recommend any practitioner, if your client asks you to look at the possibility of being well certified, you look at the preconditions first, because that's where you really have to start. That's a sort of make or break situation. Other thing I would mention, for those of you who did use the WELL V2 pilot, there's no longer any glazing VLT limit on the window, the methods, and also the lighting education requirement has been removed. So we don't have to deal with that. Anything you want to add to that, Gayatri?
No, I think you've covered the precondition really well. I just wanted to hone in on the fact that the precondition has got very minimum requirements for daylight. It's very basic. The requirement here is to just provide light exposure. That's the intent. And if that's not possible, we ask and we require that the circadian lighting requirements are met, because we do think that it's essential for the building to have to provide appropriate light exposure for people. But that can be done by floors. So if you have 15 floors of great daylight and then there's a basement floor, it can be mixed and matched. The options can be mixed and matched depending on limitations or options for the project.
That's sort of a perfect segue into the next feature we're going to talk about, which is L05 Daylight Design, which basically, if L01 sets sort of a minimum baseline requirement for daylighting, then the next feature, L05, steps it up a notch. And it has two options. Once again, this is two options for meeting the requirements, proximity to windows and a window to floor area ratio. But both of them do have a minimum visual light transmittance threshold that your glazing has to meet. So you have to know the VLT of your glazing in order to do this. This is also where shading is introduced as a requirement, or at least an option. You can get 2 additional points if you provide shading. But this is pretty easy because there's no computer simulation required to get the points in L05 Daylight Design. And then we want to step it up another notch. We go to L06, where we do get into computer modeling and calculating your spatial daylight autonomy. There are limits for that. The limits are more stringent than they are in L01. They're equivalent to the stringency in LEED for 2 or 3 points in LEED for daylighting, for meeting spatial daylight autonomy thresholds. There's also an option to meet this with a European standard, CEN 17037-2018 Annex A, which I have to admit I know nothing about, working primarily in the United States. But for those of you working in Europe or elsewhere, you can use that method.
Special thank you to Paul Rogers, who helped with deciphering the European standard. So it works in higher latitudes. It takes into account daylight hours instead of regularly occupied hours. So taking into account the changes, the variability in daylight hours in winter versus summer, it works really well for projects in northern latitudes. So definitely explore that if your if your project is somewhere up north and has very, very short days.
So Ken, I think we got through the first grouping of daylighting.
Awesome, thanks you too. So moving on, it only makes sense to move from daylight to circadian lighting. So I'm gonna bring Robert in. I turned on his camera, thank you, sir. So Robert, circadian's been one of the most discussed topics in WELL, I think, and it's led to a lot of good education and learning. Why don't you walk us through and let us know what we need to know, please?
Yeah, so circadian lighting, this feature is really just about brighter days and darker nights, within the built environment. Daylight's obviously the preferred method, but if you can't do it, electric lighting is big. I think that the one big key thing that you have to know here is that it's not horizontal luminance, it's vertical. So what's what's entering the eye kind of in the view of the user. So at 4 foot above finished floor, if they're sitting. And what we're looking for is melanopic lux, not regular lux. So so in order to get, all you have to do is basically have a weighting factor, a melanopic ratio if you use the calculator, or a lot of manufacturers might refer to it as an M to P ratio, the melanopic to photopic ratio. It's just a way to convert from the photopic lux or foot candles to a melanopic metric. And so the way that they've done it is, brighter days and darker nights. So if you get 150 melanopic lux, that's 1 point. But if you make it brighter to 240 melanopic lux, that's worth 3 points. So getting brighter is going to be better. And I think we all understand that. So Well has kind of designed it in a way to progressively give you more points by doing it brighter. So that is what it is. Also a minimum of 4-hour block at these light levels, and some portion of it has to be before 1 p.m. So that's what it is. What it isn't, though, is color tuning or advanced controls or anything that's really complicated or expensive. The concept of brighter days in the office is just that. It just needs to be brighter, which means that it doesn't need to send nighttime signals in the office. It doesn't need to do a lot of things that say that it must change. And so it isn't a bunch of complication and expensive controls. It really is just trying to say, hey, the interior environment that we have today is not bright enough during the daytime. It's too bright at night. And really, one key thing you could do is make the daytime brighter. And that is with a higher melanopic ratio, higher vertical lux. There's some strategies to get there. I think that's all I got on circadian lighting. But if there's questions, please bring them my way. I'll come back for some other stuff.
Yeah, I just add to that. I mean, I think that it's important what Robert was saying, how that this isn't really as complicated as people have sort of thought. It's basically meeting a melanopic lux level at the eye for a certain period of time during the day. And you don't have to have a complicated control system. You don't have to have tunable white system. You don't have to, have any kind of complex or special fixtures or anything. You just have to hit those melanopic lux levels.
That's right. Now you're on mute, Ken.
Oh, that's not good. I was saying it's nice when things get a little simpler, Glenn. So thanks for jumping in.
Well, it's always been that simple. I think people have just been sort of flummoxed by it, and it's a simple requirement, but designing effectively to it is not simple. I guess I should say that. I mean, providing those light levels, those melanopic lux levels at the eye, without having excessive glare and without having excessive energy use, that's the hard part. And I think that's that's where people have struggled, and will continue to struggle, actually.
Yeah, we've seen the energy use question come up in our work, certainly.
I think Robert's got something to say to that.
So. Oh,
so.
no, I just said, and speaking of glare, that's a nice segue, Glenn, that you just set up there.
Exactly.
On that note, yeah, so we'll move on to our next two groupings.
Here we go.
Yeah, so our next two groupings are going to really focus around lighting design and the quality of visual environment. And they're going to get us actually through the whole sequence here. So Glenn and Robert, we're going to turn to you again and ask you two to walk us through.
Okay, well, we're going to start with L04 glare control. And we're heading into basically, so we've established a requirement for lighting for circadian entrainment and with daylighting or electric lighting. But then there's all kinds of other lighting quality criteria or requirements that we all know basically that Well does then cover, and we'll tick off sort of every one as we go through these. But we start with glare, and this is sort of my favorite feature because I think that glare is kind of our number-one quality issue in lighting today, and probably has been for a long time. the glare feature in V2 is for those of you who used it in V1, you will find it much improved and much easier to use and much easier to understand. There are two options in the feature. One is a fixture-based option, and the other is a space or room-based option where you model the room and calculate, well, I'll go through this. So back first to the fixture. Within the fixture-based option, there are two criteria, two ways to do it. One, you can meet a maximum luminance limit for all the fixtures in the space, or you can meet a certain UGR limit. Now, for those of you working internationally, I'm sure your UGR is very familiar. Your manufacturers are publishing UGR numbers, and that's probably the way you're going to go. For those of us in the United States, where UGR is just starting to kind of take hold, the luminance limit is probably going to be where you want to go, and it's easy to derive with an IES file. You can determine what the maximum candela per square meter is between 45 and 90. It's a no-brainer. You don't need any special information from the manufacturer besides an IES file, which hopefully you have. The other option is to do a UGR simulation in the computer to calculate the UGR for your space. That can be done in AGI, or it can be done in Dialux and maybe other softwares. It's not that hard to do. It's probably more complicated than just doing a fixture-based option. But if you, for some reason, didn't meet the fixture limits, either luminance or UGR, you could then go to a computer model and see what you get there. I think that kind of covers it.
All right. Well, I'll jump into electric light quality, which is color rendering and flicker. So color rendering, pretty simple. You got to meet a certain criteria for color rendering. And so I think it's important the way that it's done. So it's either CRI of 90 or greater, or CRI of 80 with an R9 of 50. So making sure that it's still getting the reds rendered properly. I think that's important to make sure that that higher color quality is there. And this is kind of more in where your non-circulation spaces, so where your desk is going to be. And the other one, the new one, flicker requirements is kind of might be the new daunting task that that I will tell you is not daunting at all. In fact, so basically you might look at those numbers and go, I have no idea what these flicker numbers are. Basically, NEMA has created a standard, IEEE has created a standard, and Title 24 through, they call their JA10, has created a standard. And so the manufacturers don't have to really go through much rigor. All this flicker stuff relies on the driver. So the power supply that goes in all these fixtures generate the flicker that comes out of it. So all that means from a specifier is you have to specify a driver that that meets one of these three flicker criteria. And if you're an LIRC manufacturer, you should probably make sure that you have a driver that meets one of these flicker criteria. And that's pretty much it. You want to have that holistically throughout. But it is not as hard as daunting as flicker might sound. The driver does all the work. And those companies know exactly how to test it and how to design for it. You just guys have to specify it and know to ask for it, basically.
Great, thanks, Robert.
Jump in?
Sure.
Oh, can
Of
I
course.
just jump in? Okay, I just wanted to note that if you're pursuing circadian lighting design feature, the chances are that there is possibility of higher glare, because the answer to circadian lighting seems to be to bump up the light levels, and that means higher glare values or flicker. These, I feel like L04 and L08 are very complementary to the L03, which is a circadian lighting feature. As someone who suffers from migraines, glare and flicker can have huge impacts on people's productivity and just overall feeling of well-being and health. So these two features are, to me, absolutely essential to go with L03 circadian lighting design.
I think that's a really good point. I think that in an ideal world, I guess that they would be preconditions,
All of them.
Yeah, but I think that what Gayatri's done with V2 is made these two, glare and flicker, easier to meet by sort of just reorganizing things. I mean, both those features in V1 were features that the practitioner looked at and go like, we kind of threw up our arms. We didn't really know exactly what to do, and the manufacturers didn't know what information to provide exactly. It was a little bit confusing. So now it's much clearer, and I think that, yes, the flicker numbers won't be on the spec sheet, but they should be obtainable from the manufacturers, and hopefully the manufacturer will start to publish things on their spec sheets, and we can, then easily meet the flicker feature requirements and get the points.
And Glenn, I'm going to use that as a segue, because I wanted to throw in here that our LIRC partners last year published a really great guideline directed at manufacturers to help people specify. And so there is a guide out there that is going to be updated to get in alignment with V2, but it is still worth taking a look at if you're a manufacturer or even if you're a specifier, to get a handle on this particular set of credits and circadian lighting as well. And there are recommendations in there on how manufacturers can standardize amongst each other in how this information is presented on a cut sheet or on a website to make it clearer for the specifiers to find it and make use of it. So at the end, we're going to give some resources that both IALD and Gayatri have to share with everyone that'll help with that. So Gayatri, I think I'm going to turn to you now to take us through these last couple of slides, and maybe Glenn will jump in from time to time.
Okay, just want to give a shout out to LIRC before I get into this bit for the amazing resource that they put together for manufacturers. It's the most beautiful brochure or resource that I have seen, so definitely have a look at it, and it gives a lot of information on how to present this information on data sheets. We are actively updating it for V2. V2 is pretty fresh. We just released it last week, but this is completely applicable for projects pursuing V2 pilot. So with that, I'm going to move to lighting strategies. Lighting strategies, we have bucketed this to kind of cover the gamut of topics or features that cover the visual environment. The very first one is L02 visual lighting design, which is a precondition. And the requirements are very simple. It's basically provide enough light to see for the tasks that are being conducted in the space. We have also asked that the ages of the occupants in the space be taken into consideration, and light levels be allocated accordingly. We think that is very important based on the research that's out there about the quality of life as it relates to light levels. For seniors, one fall due to not being able to see the stairs is enough to reduce in a mobility for a very long time, and that can lead to depression and a lot of other things. So it's essential to consider the age ranges of people in the spaces. L02 is tested on site, so all we ask is that the lighting professionals submit the tasks, the age ranges, and the light levels that they're using based on any code. If the code that you're using is not in there, please just submit an equivalency and we'll review that for you. And just once you submit those values to us, the performance testing agent will come on site and take measurements. And these are all for tasks on the horizontal surface and not on the vertical surface. Glenn, anything to add?
Well, I would just say that there are 5 reference standards you can use, and for U.S. designers, the IES Handbook on Recommended Practices is the one we would probably go to. So for a lighting designer, it's basically just do what you would do anyhow, provide basic light levels, and you don't really have to. I mean, you probably should go through it. Maybe you want to have some documentation in your pocket of where you've modeled certain typical spaces. But one thing that's been confusing about this in version 1 is there are people who thought, oh, I have to provide calculations for every square meter of the project, and you don't. You don't have to do that. You just have to basically follow good design practice.
And with that, we can move to L07. This is the feature with the least number of points, but that is not an indication of the power of the feature. It's one of my favorite features. It's very unassuming. It requires very basic things. There are two options. One is very prescriptive and one is more descriptive. And what's required is just meeting some lighting balance parameters. We've provided ratios, we've provided very prescriptive requirements, or if you are an IALD member, if you are a CLD, if you've got the CLD certificate credential, if you are a lighting professional, you can submit a professional narrative saying that you have met the requirements and you have considered certain requirements that have been outlined, and just submit a professional narrative. We'll obviously check that, or GBCI will check that. I don't see the documentation, but GBCI will check that. And as long as there's nothing like insane in there, I think it's acceptable. So it's a shift from what we've done earlier, and it really leans into the creativity and the power of the lighting designer to provide visually comfortable environments.
Yeah, I just add to this to make sure that people understand how easy this is. Once again, this is another one where it's basically just follow good lighting design practice. And so what IWBI is saying, if you have some kind of qualification as a professional lighting designer or certification, then they will sort of take your word for it, basically, figure you know what you're doing. So this isn't hard to achieve. You just have to, once again, follow good design practice.
Some encouragement to have a lighting designer on your team.
Well, there you go.
Okay, and now we can move to L09, occupant lighting control. This is an optimization as well. It's about providing controllability. There's a lot of research about controllability and people's satisfaction with spaces. You can see that in patients in wards. You can see that in productivity in offices. So the intention here is to provide as much controllability to people through zoning, depending on the size of the zone or the fewer the number of people that can control the immediate environment, the points are allocated. So this means that if you have a space with 100 people and 10 people can have separate controls, so we have 10 buckets of 10, or you get a certain number of points. And if you have 5 people, so the zone reduces, the number of points increases. So it's all related to how the controls are set for a space, and it's to encourage higher controllability so that people can choose their own lighting environment. This is an approach that we have taken and we've seen great success in with thermal comfort. We've found that people gravitate towards places that are more comfortable to them. That's directly related to how satisfied they are with the space. I tend to gravitate towards warmer spaces. My boss tends to gravitate towards colder places. So allowing people to choose and allowing people to decide what is comfortable for them has a great impact on how they perceive the space to be. The second part here requires that projects provide supplemental lighting. Supplemental lighting allows for, again, people to control the lighting environment in their immediate zone. Now, this can be for 2 reasons. The first is age-related requirements for higher light levels, and the second is just basic preference. I prefer much higher light levels than many people I know, and knowing that I can ask for supplemental lighting makes a huge difference. If folks want more light to see, due to whatever reason, and specifically due to age-related requirements, they can ask for supplemental lighting. I realized this when one day I went back home and my parents had changed up the lights in the kitchen, and I noticed that it was brightly lit, and I was like, what's going on? And my dad's just like, oh no, we couldn't see it. It's really nice now, but to me it was really brightly lit. So you don't realize when you actually need higher levels of light. We want to be able to provide that option for people to ask for it if needed.
Awesome, Gayatri, thank you.
Can I add one thing, Ken? I just want to add one thing. I think that all these lighting quality features I think for those of us who've used or struggled with the LEED interior lighting credit, a lot of this will sound very familiar. And what I see happening is a lot of crossover between the requirements of the LEED interior lighting credit and the WELL V2 features. And the LEED interior lighting credit is undergoing a renovation, and I think when that's done, you're gonna see a lot of similarity where you'll be able, if you meet the, say the, I don't know, I want to pick one, but you meet one of these features for WELL, you'll also be meeting it for LEED, and which is going to make it a lot easier for us practitioners, basically, when we're, because a lot of projects often are LEED and WELL, pursuing LEED and WELL.
Right.
The other thing I want to say is I just want to actually, Gayatri and I have had our like friendly debates over the last months and everything, and I just want to say, like, I want to thank Gayatri for reaching out to the lighting design community and the manufacturers and getting our input. And that's been, I mean, it's really a privilege to be able to have influence on the standard that we have to use. And I've really been on her case about a lot of things, but she's taken all the comments well, and that's because she's opened up and listened to everybody, and I really want to thank you for that.
Thanks so much, Glenn. I just want to say that the lighting community is my family. My father was in the lighting design community. This is pretty much my family, but Glenn, Ken, Robert, and all the other light concept advisors have been instrumental in the changes that you see. So a big thank you to everybody who was on the concept advisory, to everybody who submitted an AAP, who submitted a technical question. Really, the feedback has helped, draw perspective and understanding of what is working and what is not, and what is feasible. Because while the research is very clear, the strategies and best practices that we have don't match, and it has been a challenge to kind of get them to be aligned. But the feedback that the lighting community has provided has been so helpful. So thank you, and please keep it coming.
Well, and to follow up on that, Gayatri, I think it was probably 5 years ago when we first sat down together to talk about an IALD WELL relationship. And that's been your guys' attitude from the very beginning, was to reach out and get a conversation started, and to make sure that you were getting the input from our community, which is fabulous and greatly appreciated. And it's been a really fun process with you guys over the years. So it's been awesome. So actually there, we finished all 9 features. We're in good shape so far. It's a quarter of, and we do have some questions. So why don't we roll into that now? And yeah, if you would put your questions, rather than putting your questions in the chat box, if you could put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, at least on my screen, it's just to the left of the chat box. And Gayatri, the first question I see in the roll here is actually one you and I have chatted about from time to time.
Okay.
So, can somebody be WELL certified just in the lighting concept, or do they need to get validated in all of them?
For now, get validated in all of them. We think that it is necessary right now to get an understanding or a holistic understanding of the rating system and how it works, and how symbiotic some concepts are. So, for example, meeting certain requirements in light will probably get you some requirements in mind, because of just the symbiosis that exists between light and mental health. So, for now, certification or credentials in WELL require all 10 concepts.
Fair enough. Go get those study guides. Right. I think this one is going back to our daylight discussion. What is the minimum light exposure in lux levels?
Yeah, I can answer. There are none in any of the options. It's a little more complicated than that, but in the simple options, it's a matter of the percentage of either the percentage of the regularly occupied space has to be in a certain lateral distance of the windows, or you have to have a minimum ratio of glazing area to floor area. So there's no light levels at all. It's a pretty basic criteria. if you use the simulation method, then you have spatial data autonomy levels that you have to meet.
Yep, and I'll note that all this information is actually on WELL's website. As you read through feature to feature, you'll see that they outline it really nicely for you and how to go through these steps. Gayatri, probably you again. Is there official software to run calculations, or is WELL accepting of all simulations, no matter what software somebody develops it in?
Accepting of all simulations. It's not software dependent. Just we basically need the report and not necessarily the simulations of on the architectural drawing. I'm definitely using the wrong terminology here, but that's what we require.
Awesome, awesome, nice and simple. Is it possible to get a copy of this presentation? And I'm going to have to let IALD respond to that at some point through email. I don't know if I assume they're going to post this, but I don't know if you could get your own personal copy.
Joe, I think you're muted.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, if you allow the presentation to be shared, we will take it, PDF it, and include it in the follow-up email. And then you can point to it and have it.
There you go. Gayatri, probably you again. How does IWBI define frequently occupied spaces within a long-term care facility?
This is interesting. By long-term care, I'm assuming you mean senior living. The requirements are really customized and specific to that. We have a process where you can ask questions for particular space types that are not covered. But as a rule of thumb, we consider 2 occupant types, the employees and the residents, and we take into account where they spend more than an hour. Continuously in any of those spaces. So that's our definition of regularly occupied spaces, but it will need to be customized for that specific space type, only because the requirements are so important and so different.
Fair enough. Okay. This one I think is an opinion question, but I'll put it out there for all of you. Does anybody think the U.S. will ever adopt UGR as a metric?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. I mean, there's no like federal adoption of standards or anything, but in practice, I think probably yes. I see it sort of getting hold here as people understand it, and there seems to be some consensus that it is probably the best glare metric out there. And also, as I said, AGI, which is the modeling software that most US designers use, can do the UGR calcs for the space. I think it's going to be, and I think that WELL is actually going to drive this. And I think that if LEED interior lighting credit incorporates UGR, which it may, then that's going to be a driver. LEED and WELL will be a driver for UGR, and we'll probably start seeing US manufacturers publishing their fixture UGR data.
Need some public demand.
That's just so I'm sort of expressing my opinion based on what I see going on, but
can I put Robert on?
Yeah.
Can I put Robert on the spot and ask him what he thinks based on his experience with manufacturers and manufacturing about UGR?
So on UGR, I don't have much experience in there. I don't fully understand the calculation method to even give an educated answer, so I apologize. You definitely put me on the spot there, and I'm
sorry.
unqualified to talk.
Can speaking of Robert, there's a question earlier on that I think maybe we missed that I think Robert.
Yeah, there was one about melanopic ratios and
melanopic calculations.
How do you do it when not all fixture manufacturers have this information developed or still working on it? So really the way that I see it, and I've spent a lot of time on doing this, this is what BIOS tries to do, is that unless you specifically target melanopsin, there's not a whole lot you could do with just the different phosphors. And so I actually wrote a blog for, well, I don't know, like 18 months ago that kind of gives you per color temperature what the foot candles are. You'd have to convert it to lux. are required in order to meet well. And this kind of goes over different, CRIs, different CCTs, but generally speaking, there are people who kind of, you could have ultra high CRI, but really, unless you're targeting melanopsin specifically, they're all going to do pretty much the same. And it actually is a pretty tight cluster. So if you check out that, I think I could throw that blog on the chat and you guys could check it out. Let's see, to all panelists and attendees.
Yeah.
You did? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Perfect.
And IALD.
I was going to say, I think the question brings up a point, which maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, but that we need manufacturers to publish the equivalent melanopic lux of their luminaires, which shouldn't be hard to do, Robert, right? If they have the spectral power distribution, they just plug it into the calculator and spit out the number. Now, because currently we have to try to get the SPD from the manufacturer and then plug it into the calculator ourselves, and it's like we shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah. So I know from our standpoint, from BIOS, we have it on our website, the SPDs, so that you could plug them in directly. What we've noticed, so we have going on 25 partners now, we have seen maybe 3 fixtures of all the fixtures that we have that have some slight change in the spectral power distribution, just based on the fixture itself. So by and large, it really doesn't change a whole lot of the base spectrum. So you could go through the base LED spectrum, and I'll just to make that less elusive, there are edgelit systems that kind of just had a little bit more phosphor conversion. So that's what caused a little bit of the change to a warmer color temperature. But by and large, these fixtures don't change the spectral power distribution. So if you get the base spectral power distribution, that's going to be pretty good to get a sense of the melanopic ratios. And
I think, Robert, what you're saying is you're pointing people back at the LED manufacturers themselves.
LED manufacturers should be.
Luminaire manufacturer.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
Right, but for us, I mean, when we talked about this feature, I said it's really not as complicated as it is. You just have to calculate the EML/LTI. But the thing is, it's real much easier if the manufacturer just gives us the melanopic ratio number for their luminaire, and as opposed to us having to hunt it down. So this is a pitch to the manufacturers. Just publish your EML number on your cut sheet.
Yep. M to P, or melanopic ratio. That's all we could do.
Yeah.
Is the weighting factor that you apply.
Right.
Yep. And I think you probably covered our next question. Somebody's asking just how to manipulate dialux for that purposes. How does one achieve a well-lit space through? Go ahead, Robert. You want to jump in?
So I guess I would say something. So in AGI, I don't know. I haven't had any experience with dialux, but AGI, when you do the meter on your calc planes, you could tilt them 90 degrees, and it'll and that would be able to get you your vertical lux in AGI. I don't know if anyone here has experience, because the question is specifically about dialux.
Dialux itself. Yeah.
Can you do it? Can you do the same thing? Just check to see if there's an ability for the meter for the calculations to tilt.
You can with dialux.
With dialux.
You can.
Yeah.
Okay.
How does one achieve a well-lit space through natural lighting via skylights, yet manage the amount of heat inlet and heat trapped in a building, and how to manage this strategy in a hot climate? Who'd like to take a swing at that?
Well, that's the fundamental daylighting design question. Hire a competent daylighting designer.
Fair enough.
No, I'm sorry to sound snarky, but there's not a simple answer to that question.
It's a hard question. Because it's a balance, right? You want to make sure that there is enough daylight, but you don't want it to be all blocked out by solar shading or by placement of people. So it's a combination of figuring out what solar shading tactics you're going to use, understanding where the project is located, and making sure that people are comfortable there is no right answer, but both thermal comfort and light exposure are fundamental to people's satisfaction in a place. Many, many studies have proven it. So it's a tricky one. So which is why, to Glenn's point, hiring somebody who has experience with this is going, such as a daylight designer, is going to go a long way in achieving those goals.
I mean, it's very easy to bring lots of daylight into the space if you don't care about energy performance. And it's very easy to have really good energy performance if you don't care about bringing any daylight into the space, because most energy efficient building is probably a sealed up box. Depending on the climate. And I think the question brings up a good issue about climate. It's very climate dependent. Anyhow.
Thank you, sir. Similar to earlier, Gayatri, how does well-defined regularly occupied spaces in hotels and multifamily residential buildings?
In hotels and multifamily residential buildings, we consider dwelling units. So hotel rooms have different requirements in some features, same as the apartment itself. So when the requirements are different, a space type has been introduced. Otherwise, the requirements remain the same.
Robert, this is probably in your alley. Why do companies who offer tunable white call it circadian lighting? Is there any standards on these claims when they're trying to meet well?
No, I don't know why they call it. I think color tuning is interesting, and it certainly sends a visual message. But spectrum is really what decides, what drives melanopic lux, and that's the name of the game here. And so, yeah, it's cool. It's neat. I guess I'll defer to some people who've implemented it. It's probably more complicated than it's worth, the value that it adds. And really, I think that as we start really understanding this better, we should really do the controls and the system a lot more simple. And I've always kind of thought that, even if you do this color tuning system, if no one likes things on the far ends, then it just starts coming down to like, all right, now you got something that goes from 4,000 to 3,000. Yay. You just spent a lot of money and controls on something that's not doing a whole lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just add to that. I mean, we did our first well project. It was under well V1. We met the circadian lighting requirement with a conventional light fixture, 4000K LED, no color tuning, no, nothing. It was just the right fixture and the right application.
That's right.
So.
Probably better directed at the marketing people than the rest of us. Have there been any studies on occupant well-being in buildings that have been built to the WELL standards? Gayatri, I think that's yours.
Yeah. Thanks. This is a good question. There have been several studies that have been conducted by third-party kind of researchers. We require that projects, as a precondition, conduct surveys for their own buildings to understand how the systems are functioning. We require that, that people's satisfaction are regularly checked. And we have seen overall a much higher uptick in satisfaction, productivity with well-certified buildings. So there are studies going on, and as you all know, the studies take time, but there are one or two that have come out. BRE has released one, and there's one more that's failing me, but all available on our website.
Great. Now I'm going to make this our last question because we're actually at our hour. Just a general question. Why should one consider getting their building certified?
Wow. And you're saying we're at time. Okay, so, why would you, this is something that it's for trust. Our requirements are based on very, very, validated research and best practices, but the reality is that the requirements are available for free. The certification indicates that the requirements have been met, and they continue to be met through recertification. Every 3 years, we require that the project validate all of the features again. So the seal indicates excellence, and which is why I think buildings and projects should consider well certification.
Excellent. That one gave you an opportunity to get that in at the end. So.
Wait, Ken, I'm looking at all the questions remaining. There's some really awesome questions in here. I don't know.
We have 4 more minutes. That's what Joe said.
Yeah,
so if
we
you
can-
all
Joe
are
says we have 4 more minutes?
Yeah, 4 more minutes.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay.
If you all are okay staying over, then we would love to chat
I'm okay
with
if
you.
you're okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. Any tips to achieve EML and energy codes cohesively? Right.
Well,
Robert, you're smiling.
so
yeah, we're not
just,
supposed to put in product plugs, right, Robert?
no, of course. I would say that I did just give a talk on at Education, the virtual education on this light and health and energy efficiency. I think that there are things that can be done with, the most energy efficient way to do is make it colder color temperatures. But if you don't want to do that, spectral optimization does lead to energy efficiency relative to a non-spectrally optimized one. Because if you don't, even though an LED lighting system has good lumens per watt, because it has such a poor melanopic ratio, you have to crank up the lumen so much to do it. So having something that's spectrally optimized for what you're trying to achieve actually can save you energy doing that.
Yeah, and I'd say it's actually a 3-way equation or whatever: EML, energy, and glare.
Absolutely.
You kind of meeting all 3.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's hard. Depending on what product
But it's
you
doable.
use. But depending on what product you use.
Next one. When addressing glare evaluation through a lighting design software, are there any guidelines in WELL on an observer's position and angle increments of their vision direction? In other words, I can manipulate the data on incoming glare in the software by positioning an observer and setting different angles of view at the light source.
I think, well, there are probably participants here who know the answer to this question, but I believe UGR tells you where the observer has to go and what the angles are and everything. It's part of the UGR metric, and so if you're doing UGR calculation in Dialux or AGI, it's going to just tell you what to do. I don't think you have a lot of choice.
I also just want to add, there are ways to manipulate and find loopholes, but our assumption is that our projects and project participants are well-intentioned and won't do that. So please don't.
And you are signing and certifying that you are doing that. Yeah.
Exactly.
I know much work went into the graduation from V2 pilot to V2. Gayatri, she says, thank you. Nevertheless, shall I dare ask, what is next?
Sleep. But in all seriousness, we are going to be actively looking at market feedback for this rating system, making sure that we are, reviewing and making sure that, any loopholes are closed. We also want to make sure there is maximum flexibility. So populations such as children and seniors are going to be more actively addressed. We think we are 95% of the way there, but right now we just want to plug holes and make sure there's maximum flexibility for the rating system. So that's next. Not very far, doesn't sound very glamorous, but very, very important.
And I think you are looking for some new volunteer advisors as well, right? So,
Yes.
if anybody's interested in that, you could reach out to Gayatri as well. Does WELL apply to any of the exterior spaces, for example, L08?
Currently, no. The only scenario where exterior spaces are taken into account is for L02, and that's only if those exterior spaces are part of the project boundary. So for example, if the project boundary is just the building and there's a garden outside and that's not been registered, then that's okay. Those don't have to meet the requirements. But if the garden is part of the project boundary, then L02 basic visual lighting requirements need to be met. So apart from L02, no.
Excellent. Do you recommend artificial dynamic lighting according to the natural daylight course regarding well-being, or is it just the melanopic lux important in the static CCT?
Oh boy, I think Robert and I both want to answer this one.
You go, Glenn. You go, Glenn.
Well, no, I just have a partial answer, which is this is one of my little bugaboos, is that there's this impression that the CCT of daylight changes a lot throughout the day, and it doesn't. Now the spectral, actually the spectral power distribution doesn't change a lot throughout the day. It may change a lot because of changing sky conditions or where you're pointing your spectrometer, and reflectance is off of the ground. But basically, there's this. So anyhow, that's my little thing. Like, so no, I don't recommend dynamic lighting or tunable white to follow the natural course of daylight, because daylight doesn't change that much throughout the day.
Right, and then when it does, it changes to things. I mean, really, what it is for the majority of the day is between 5,500 Kelvin to 40,000 Kelvin. That's the range, and none of these interior lighting systems even touch that. So, what did you just do?
Right, and they don't begin to simulate the spectral power distribution of daylight either. And
right.
No matter what we're trying to do is, if we're doing it whether we're doing our circadian entrainment with electric light, we're just trying, as Robert has said, just peak up that what do you call it? The blue light, the melanopic sensitivity.
Right, the sky blue specifically is kind of where that color, where melanopic sensitivity is. But the reason why you would want to pinpoint that is because the interior lighting is never going to meet what we're getting on outside. So you almost have to amplify that response. And really, that is kind of the name of the game, is to try to do the best we can with the situation that we're in, we spend 90% of our time indoors.
Thank you to the attendees for your time. Thank you for staying on for the Q&A. Great conversations. Thank you to the panelists for agreeing to speak on this great topic. And thank you again to our sponsor, Coolidge Lighting, for supporting this webinar. We'll see everyone on the next one. Have a great rest of the day, evening, afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you again, everyone.